The views and opinions expressed on America's Workforce Union podcast and its digital media channels are solely those of the speakers and do not necessarily represent the views and opinions of the producers or sponsors.
Welcome to the America's Workforce Radio Podcast, the flagship production of the American Workers Radio and Podcast Network, where organized labor and its never-ending fight to protect the rights of the American worker come first. Now, presented by LIUNA, Laborers International Union of North America. Here's your host, Ed Flash Ferens.
Get ready for the PATH Act. What is it? Pre-apprenticeships to hard hats, and it has bipartisan support. Meanwhile, a rail crew forced to evacuate in Canada due to the wildfires. And today on the show, the latest from the United Steelworkers. Welcome to the Tuesday, July 21st edition of America's Workforce, where we're available on at least 5 platforms. That includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. Mariana Padias will be our featured guest on the show today. Mariana is the Assistant Director of Organizing for one of our great sponsors here on America's Workforce. That would be the United Steelworkers, USW.org, the national website. Mariana has been with the union since 2010. She started her career as an in-house counsel in their legal department and worked with District 12 in the western part of the country. Then she moved to organizing back in 2019 and has worked on a variety of campaigns. One of them, which was successful, was at the Big River Sawmill in Gloster, Mississippi. And she's going to talk about how difficult that was. And a lot of this has to do with our weak labor law and the union-busting attorneys that are so prevalent in society today. We're also going to talk about getting that first contract. By now, you probably know there is legislation that did pass the House on securing a faster, key word is faster, first contract. And Mariana is going to talk about that as well. National website, USW.org. And speaking of organizing, got to do a shout out here to the roughly 24 Penn Hills library workers who voted recently to join the United Steelworkers, citing their desire to better serve their community, seek better wages and benefits, and have a voice on the job. So congratulations to them. Now, a brief look into the world of labor. This segment brought to you by Boyd Watterson Asset Management. We're talking $38 billion of assets under advisement. You can find more at boydwatterson.com. 2 members of Congress, Don Norcross, Democrat out of New Jersey, and a member of the IBEW, along with Brian Fitzpatrick, a Republican out of Pennsylvania, co-chairs of the Bipartisan Building Trades Caucus, have introduced what they call the Pre-Apprenticeships to Hard Hats, or PATH Act, to create, to fund, and sustain pre-apprenticeship programs for all of the trades. And by the way, Senator Martin Heinrich, Democrat out of New Mexico, is leading the companion legislation in the Senate. Now, a little background here. Pre-apprenticeships are a proven strategy for building a workforce ready to meet industry demands and will instruct participants on everything from basic literacy and math to work readiness skills that can be tailored to the needs of students as well as labor markets. The PATH Act will support more quality pre-apprenticeship programs and build a workforce ready to fill critical construction jobs by providing grants to be used for training, curriculum development, evaluations, and more. Recipients who would be eligible for the grants would include employers, unions, state and local workforce development boards, community-based organizations, post-secondary educational institutions, school districts, state education agencies, high schools, small businesses, and veteran service organizations. Norcross said the following: young people need to know that expensive four-year degrees are not the only way to earn a good living and provide value to your community. America needs to build more of everything, from housing to energy to infrastructure. And a pre-apprenticeship program, well, that is the perfect entry point for the high-paying, fulfilling careers available right now. My own electrical apprenticeship kickstarted a life that I'm extremely proud of and serves as my inspiration to create more of those opportunities for today's workforce. Don Norcross, congratulations. Hopefully we will follow this through the entire Congress, because you know what? We need it now. In the meantime, a rail crew was forced to evacuate a Canadian National Railway train. This happened near Armstrong, Ontario, a week ago, after it became surrounded by an out-of-control wildfire. Now, the union representing the workers has called on the rail organization to halt operations through active wildfire zones altogether, arguing the railway sent the crew into a foreseeable hazard. Hello? The incident lands amid a brutal wildfire season that has choked Toronto's skies orange and raises familiar questions about how much discretion frontline transportation workers have to refuse unsafe assignments, and whether Canadian rail safety rules adequately account for climate-driven hazards that did not factor into older regulatory frameworks. Yeah, that fire was unbelievable, and it encompassed a good chunk of the country. Still parts of it underway today. All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, the Assistant Director for Organizing for the United Steelworkers. Once again, you're listening to America's Workforce.
You're listening to America's Workforce with Ed Flash Ferens.
It takes LiUNA to power North America with affordable energy. The men and women of LiUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, have the skills needed to build and maintain oil, natural gas, nuclear, solar, and wind projects that are shaping America's energy future. From new energy tech to retrofitted facilities, LiUNA members do it all. Find out what it takes to be powered by LiUNA at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the United Steelworkers. You can find more at usw.org. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Communication Workers of America. You can find more at cwa-union.org.
American workers are sick of struggling to get by. It's time to get ahead. In the Teamsters Union, workers are winning industry-leading contracts, historically high wages, fully paid health care, and retirement benefits you can count on. Across the country, Teamsters fight alongside our brothers and sisters to secure a better life. It's what we've been doing and how we've been living for more than a century. When we fight, we win. Join us. Be a Teamster.
America's Workforce is presented by the Laborers International Union of North America. Feel the power right now at liuna.org. This segment of the show is brought to you by the Brotherhood of Maintenance of Way Employees Division of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. For more information, please visit bmwe.org. The Iron Workers Great Lakes District Council, consisting of 8 ironworker local unions in West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan. We build the skylines and bridges along the Great Lakes. With more work than ever before, the Great Lakes District Council is actively searching out the next great iron worker, whether it's building the next Intel plant or constructing a bridge to safely connect our great cities along the lake. So join the Iron Workers Great Lakes District Council today. Find out how and learn more about the council by visiting iwdistrictcouncil.com.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferens.
And remember, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast. AWF Union Podcast. You know, we have many sponsors here on America's Workforce, and I've said this on the show so many times. I come from a steelworker family. My dad was a steelworker for over 40 years. I had 2 uncles that work in the mills, and I want to tell you, this is a great union. And It's amazing on how they have changed over the years. I just want to read this from the USW.org website, who we represent as steelworkers. We slurry and smelt, mine and manufacture. We take care of the sick. We keep kids safe. We're rubber workers, security guards, electricians, telecom specialists. We work in courthouses and forests, oil refineries and banks, universities and utility companies. From glass to paper, cement to pharmaceuticals, electric buses to food additives, we touch every corner of our society. Amazing, amazing. That's the Steelworkers Union, well over 800,000 strong in the U.S. and in Canada. And right now, let's go to the Assistant Director of Organizing. Like to talk about organizing on this show a whole lot. And by now, you probably know that the AFL-CIO has made a goal of organizing at least 2 million workers in the next 5 years. And joining us as our featured guest right now is Mariana Padias, who is the Assistant Director of Organizing. Did I say your name correctly?
Yeah, you nailed it. Thank you.
Good. This is one of my favorite topics, along with safety. It is important that workers are safe on the job, because we know every year we commemorate Workers' Memorial Day. Every day we're losing about 14, 15 workers on the job, and many more from occupational illnesses and diseases down the road. But let's focus on organizing. Let's focus on you, a little bit about your background. Go ahead.
Yeah, I joined the Steelworkers in 2010. I started in the legal department. So I came in as one of the lawyers that worked for the Steelworkers and worked with our members out in District 12, which is the Western United States. So we have a lot of oil, a lot of mining, a lot of paper, a lot of healthcare. And so it's a real mix of the jobs that you just talked about, reading about what kind of membership we have. And then in 2019, I moved to the organizing department. I'd been an organizer before I went to law school. And so I took the assistant director position. And since then, I've been working in the department, worked on our campaigns at the University of Pittsburgh, worked on our campaigns in Puerto Rico, worked on some mining campaigns, and I continue to help move the union forward.
As in-house counsel, I'm sure you've had a number of stories and confrontations and challenges that you had to deal with, because we know, well, number one, we know labor law is weak. And, corporations, the big guys, they know about that, and they do everything to circumvent the law. Anything you could call attention to on what you had to deal with the time that you were legal counsel?
The thing I would call attention to is just the relentlessness of some employers, of some companies, to continue fighting the union. Not all of them, right? We have really good, healthy collective bargaining relationships with a lot of our members' employers, but those aren't the ones that make it to the legal department. So I think for me, the biggest one I had was ASARCO, which is a mining company in the U.S. We have 3 mines, and then there used to be a refinery in Amarillo. There used to be a smelter in Hayden, Arizona, which there's rumors that it's going to start back up. ASARCO is owned by Grupo Mexico. Grupo Mexico is the mining company based in Mexico that fights against the Mineros Union, which is a close ally of the Steelworkers. And so being involved in contract bargaining for our members at ASARCO, and just endless fighting. There was eventually a strike. There's a case right now about recognition of the union at one of the mine sites. And just, some companies just never want to enter into that partnership with the union. And it's really difficult. And then, really hats off to the members who just keep at it and keep going and want to keep their union and want to keep on having good collective bargaining agreements.
It's even getting more challenging. We focused on the miners' strike in Alabama. Warrior Met, you may recall that struggle that went on for a couple of years. And the sad part about it is, you got faceless owners. In that case, you had, a hedge fund, Blackstone, something like that. They're a Wall Street group. And it's a bunch of rich guys who pull their money together and they buy up stuff, and then they cut staff. You know the drill, and it's very, very difficult. And from what I understand, they had to go back to work. They had to go back to work because they weren't dealing with the union in that one. The other part of this is union busting. We just did a story on this with the Economic Policy Institute and Labor Lab, good group out of Montana, about how much companies are spending to bust unions. $1.7 billion a year on union avoidance. Did that number surprise you?
No, we just had some help from Labor Lab actually with one of our campaigns, USW Steel, which is Indian-owned steel manufacturer. There's 2 locations. One's in Mingo Junction. We had to have 3 elections there for the workers to win their union. And then we recently just won a decertification election because bargaining has taken over a year. The Labor Lab helped us out with that, showing that for at least 3 of those elections, the company spent over $1.27 million against those workers, which could have been reinvested in the business, could have gone to raises, could have gone to a lot of things, right? So no, that number does not surprise me anymore. We build it into our campaign plans, knowing that union busters are going to show up and that the company is most likely going to spend a lot of money on it.
And think about what kind of raises those workers could have achieved if they didn't do that kind of thing. Of course, that would never happen. They would never turn that money over to the workers. It's very, very sad. Well, there's a bright spot here. I want to get to it eventually, and that's a successful union vote at Big River Sawmill. This is in Mississippi. But I want to continue with the union busting and the fact that, okay, they organize, workers organize, and we've seen this, especially at Amazon. They have a successful campaign. And then it's justice delayed, justice denied. You know how they work here. They'll throw everything at it. They'll come and then they'll take this to Washington. Washington is not very union friendly right now. You know that with the labor board. But as far as that time period to get to a first contract, now here's the good news. You know this. There's legislation to speed up that process. And from what I understand, there is bipartisan support on that. What are we seeing right now on that?
Just to go back a little bit, right? The law requires good faith bargaining, and it isn't much, right? So let's take JSW Steel and Mingo Junction for an example. After we have an election, you can't have another election for a year. So you have a year to really establish this collective bargaining relationship, which is what the law ostensibly wants, right? After that year, workers can file a decertification election if they have a 30% showing of interest. And companies know this. And they also know that the requirements for good faith bargaining under the National Labor Relations Act, it's not so big. JSW Steel has been meeting with us for 1 to 2 days a month. Doesn't agree to very much. I don't think we have that many TAs, tentative agreements about that. And so if a company loses a union election and the workers vote for union representation, it's in the company's interest to slow walk that contract negotiation, not give an inch, meet infrequently, but enough to show that they're still making an effort so that the workers get frustrated. Maybe management colludes with a couple of workers. So then we have this decertification election on our hands and have to move forward. It takes an average of, I've seen 480 days to get a first contract in the United States. And during that time, companies shouldn't be making changes without bargaining with the union. They can make changes before they have a contract, but you have to bring the union into that sort of process, reach an agreement. Until companies use that as an excuse to not give raises for that 480 days. So then imagine you're a worker who went through this whole trouble of getting a union, you're in bargaining, and a year and a half later, you haven't had a raise and the company is blaming it on the union. It makes sense that this is a tactic that companies use. The Faster Labor Contracts Now Act, which passed the House with bipartisan support, would help us get to a first contract more quickly. So what it would require is that within 10 days of the union requesting bargaining, the parties would have to meet. That's pretty fast compared to what we see now. After 90 days of bargaining, the matter would have to be referred to the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Services for mediation. I don't know how that's going to work because the FMCS is under budgeted and understaffed right now as well. So TBD. After mediation, you get 30 days of mediation. If that doesn't work, then the FMCS would refer the parties to binding arbitration. And the parties would go through a process of selecting a 3-arbitrator panel that would eventually make, based on the offers that are on the table, would get you a binding 2-year agreement. So it's a faster process. I've been reading some like HR lawyers' websites, and they're like, oh, these arbitrators would mandate what we have to do and mandate this binding agreement. It's so unfair. But there's still 120 days to reach an agreement, right, with the union, with the workers who voted for union representation. That's 4 months where if you really put in the time and the energy and resources, you can make a lot of progress. And I think it would be a game changer for this to happen. So right now it's at the Senate, still bipartisan support. So we have Hawley and Booker, Moreno, Merkley, and Peters. And we'll see what happens.
Well, we'll see what happens in the Senate. Right now, I'm not holding my breath. And I've been following this, too, the conservative media and the House Education and Workforce Committee. Boy, they just slammed it. They called this a gift to the cultural left. The Wall Street Journal came down on this because, well, they don't want, they're saying that this is going back to big government because then the mediator's going to be involved. The government's going to be involved. But, I mean, you're going to hear a whole lot about this going forward. But anyway, we'll see what happens. You know, Mariana, I got to take a quick break here. I do want to talk about the successful vote in Mississippi. That's not easy to accomplish. We'll talk about that next. Our featured guest on the show today is Mariana Padias, Assistant Director of Organizing for one of our great sponsors here on America's Workforce, the United Steelworkers. A lot of news posted at USW.org. We'll continue with Mariana right after this on America's Workforce. Don't go away.
You're listening to America's Workforce with Ed Flash Ferens.
It takes LIUNA to keep America running. Over 70,000 public employees are part of LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, delivering critical services such as healthcare and emergency response, as well as maintaining roads and sanitation systems. Even the National Postal Mail Handlers Union, representing over 47,000 U.S. postal workers, is affiliated with LIUNA. Find out what it takes for LIUNA to keep America running at liuna.org. That's liuna.org.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Heat and Frost Insulators Labor Management Cooperative Trust. Find out more at insulators.org/LMCT. America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the Ironworkers. You can find more at ironworkers.org.
There is unity and strength for workers.
We are the USW.
We are the USW.
The United Steelworkers.
The largest industrial union in North America.
We represent 850,000 members in the U.S., Canada, and the Caribbean.
We work in metals,
rubber,
chemicals,
paper,
oil refining,
atomic energy, and the service sector.
We are steelworkers, standing strong and fighting for what's right.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers. You can find more at ifpte.org.
America's Workforce appreciates our sponsor, the Columbus Central Ohio Building and Construction Trades Council, who represents more than 18,000 workers from 19 affiliated local unions and district councils.
America's Workforce is sponsored in part by Boyd Watterson Asset Management, LLC. Find out more about our investment solutions tailored to meet the needs of Taft-Hartley funds at boydwatterson.com.
America's Workforce is brought to you in part by the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, where you can find more at teamster.org.
Now, back to America's Workforce. Here's Ed Flash Ferens.
And remember, you can check us out on at least 5 platforms. That includes YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and Pandora. And when you get an opportunity, here's what you do. Just sign up and receive our shows on a regular basis and give us a rating. We always appreciate those 5-star ratings, and please keep them coming. Also, just want to mention, too, thank you for listening to this show, America's Workforce, for 3 years now. We are the #1 union podcast in all of America. So we appreciate you as a listener. And out of 2.5 million podcasts, we're number 1302. I like that. I like that. You got a lot of people listening right now to you, Mariana. Mariana Padias is the Assistant Director of Organizing for one of our great sponsors, the United Steelworkers. I want to get into the Mississippi thing there, but you are aware of the fact that the Labor Federation, they're on a tear right now. They had a great convention back in June in Minneapolis. Liz Schuler came out swinging, saying, you know what, in 5 years, we have to get at least 2 million workers organized. Well, you're Assistant Director of Organizing. You know what's going on. You know that's pretty difficult. How do you feel about that moving forward?
Yeah, I feel great. I think it's ambitious. I think it's the goal we need. Polls show us that about 50 million American workers want a union. And we know, we just talked about union busting and the forces that are against them and figuring it out. But I think education is a big part of it. And a lot of people just don't know what a union is, misinformation about unions, thinking that they're just going to come take your dues, when really I do this job because union contracts for me are the only sustainable way for people to make qualitative and quantitative changes in their lives that they have direct input on. It gets you gains that you don't see from voting for politicians. It gets you gains that you don't see from being active in other parts of civic life. And so this is the vehicle for getting our country back where we used to be.
Yeah. And I want to say that the Steelworkers have been so good at getting information out to their members on, who stands for what. It's important they know the difference between a Democrat or a Republican or an independent for how that matters, because there's people now that don't like both parties. And one guy that's like that is Dan Osborne over in Nebraska. He's running for a Senate seat over there because he says, you know what? And he comes from a union. He's with he was a steam fitter. He was also with the Bakers Union. In fact, he led the Kellogg's boycott back in 2017. But yeah, it's important. That's another subject. Let's get back to what's going on in Mississippi here. Now, this is not easy. We know Mississippi is a right-to-work state. Not that many unions down there, but we have a successful union vote at the Big River Sawmill. What happened there, Mariana?
Yeah, it was incredible, honestly. So Big River Sawmill, it's owned by a wealthy Mississippi family, the Van Devenders. They have done things like donated a locker room to the Ole Miss football team with their name on it. Like, they are established in Mississippi. And they own 4 sawmills, 2 of which are in Mississippi, one's in Arkansas, one's in Louisiana. And the one in Gloster opened up 2 years ago. And 2 years ago, Gloster is in southwestern Mississippi. It's about an hour north of Baton Rouge and about an hour away from Natchez, Mississippi. It is the deep South. And so not a ton of union density. We have some members around there working at paper facilities, but by around there, I mean 50, 70 miles away. So Big River started up this sawmill 2 years ago, made promises to the workers. And 2 years later, they hadn't been completing those promises. So people were being hired in off the street, making more than the folks who had been there since the beginning. People were promised promotions that they weren't given. People couldn't really depend on their schedules and figure out when they would be able to leave work. There was a lot of forced overtime. So the story that stands out to me that I heard was somebody wanted to get off work at their scheduled time so they could go watch their kid play football. The supervisor made them stay late. Supervisor had a kid on the same football team. So by the time the worker already eventually got to the football game, the supervisor had been there the whole time. There was a majority Black workforce, and they called us probably in April, and they were like, hey, we want to start a union. So one of our staff representatives in Mississippi, Scott Cox, went down and met with them. They got a group together. Eventually it got too big for Scott. He had other things to do. And so he handed it over to the organizing department. And we thought we were going in to a campaign and just starting it out, getting our structure, running the model. An organizer went there and was handed 40 authorization cards out of a 130-person workforce. That was our first meeting with the workers. So they were organized. They were ready to go. An interesting campaign in that the city government was also involved. So Big River and the city of Gloster have some kind of deal. We tried to get our hands on it. We don't know what it is. But because of this understanding, workers were calling the mayor of Gloster, a 900-person town in Mississippi. Workers were calling the mayor and complaining about discrimination, complaining about the working conditions. So the mayor on May 14th, he didn't know our union campaign had started. On May 14th, he called a meeting and like 20 workers showed up with Big River management and just like hashed it out and mentioned the union campaign. So then we're public, right? And then we know the union busting is going to start. We were able to file for an election a week later. So the workers were really motivated in getting a supermajority signed up on cards so we could file a petition with the National Labor Relations Board. But by the time we filed, 4 people had been fired already. And there were unlawful interrogations going on. There were unlawful comments about the futility of bargaining. We have unfair labor practices filed about all of these charges. I think the other really interesting thing about the Big River campaign is that there was an equity firm involved, Blue Wolf. They were a minority investor in Big River, and they're pro-union. They have a labor liaison, Steve Slay, and they were appalled by the behavior of this family and confronted like different levels of Big River management saying, hey, we're a minority investor and we want you to remain neutral. We want the workers to be able to choose without threats, without these, captive audience meetings. The family that owned Big River declined to take their advice and continued to run the anti-union campaign. But we were able to get a statement of support from Blue Wolf. We were able to get the representative around there, Benny Thompson, to some meetings with workers to show that there were politicians who did support. The mayor flipped on us. The mayor went into a meeting with Big River and the next day was present at the anti-union captive audience meeting. The workers did incredible in terms of hanging on. The time between when we filed the petition, when we actually got to the election, June 25, June 26, was like 5 weeks. It was an intense anti-union campaign, as we often see. We tried to get them messages of support from other steelworkers in Mississippi. Some people at the AFL-CIO convention were able to send video messages of support. And then we had this statement from Blue Wolf, the investment firm, and they won. They won. So we're going to head into bargaining and we're going to hope to get a good agreement for them in less than 480 days, the national average for first contracts. But really, it's an incredible story for these workers down in Big River, and just like hearing them talk about what they wanted. Like they just want like workplace dignity and respect. Like they want when the company makes promises for the promises to happen. They're not revolutionary, they just want safe working conditions. They want a stable job. And now hopefully they're one step closer to getting it.
When it comes to working conditions, when I saw this story about a sawmill, the first thing that came to mind was obviously, you got to hurry up, you got to produce more, which can lead, as you know, to more injuries on the job. Did that come up in all the negotiations?
No. Well, we're not negotiating yet, but I will say that the workers, when asked about safety, all thought that Big River did a good job with safety. There's a safety rep there that everybody likes and respects. And safety was not one of the main issues pushing organizing.
Okay. Maybe they're doing things more properly than other companies. We'll see what happens here. I know when it comes to food processing, that's a big issue. I think you know that part. The other part that really got me on this, I thought all private equity firms were anti-union. You're telling me about this Blue Wolf that's pro-union? That had to surprise you, didn't it?
It did. I had heard myths about these kinds of companies before, but it was really interesting because we were filling in the head of our legislative department about this campaign and just kind of like mentioning like, even without Blue Wolf, it's a really good story about workers coming together in the South against all odds and winning their union. So we were talking to it about with Rory Hausman, our legislative and policy director. And he was just like looking it up and he was like, oh, Blue Wolf is involved with them. I've worked with them on other stuff, like an aluminum thing. And then we represent a few paper mills in Maine that I think Blue Wolf is an investor in. And he was like, let's just see what they have to say. And honestly, they were great. They met with us within a couple days and we talked to them about, what was happening on the ground. People had already been fired by then. They were shocked, which just shows me they've never done any, union organizing. It wasn't shocking at all. I mean, it's terrible, but it wasn't surprising. And then they got back to us within a week after having talked to multiple levels of Big River management and being like, yeah, they're anti-union, And then they gave us this statement that we put out to the workers saying like, hey, like this part of Big River, this minority investor, like supports your right to choose union representation or not. And now we hope that they will play a more significant role in helping us get to a fair first contract.
Well, it certainly was a surprise to me and kind of restores some of my faith in Wall Street money because we know there's big money in there and usually it goes against workers. So that's good to hear. Well, I'll tell you, I really enjoyed this conversation with you, and I definitely want to continue in the months ahead because those negotiations are going to get very, very difficult here. You're dealing with a company that, well, obviously, they don't want the union there, and they're going to do everything possible. Right now, there is a union, so hopefully we'll get that first contract. Mariana Padias, Assistant Director of Organizing for the United Steelworkers, USW.org. You take care, stay safe, and please keep in touch with us, okay?
Sounds good. Thanks.
And that'll be it for yet another edition of America's Workforce. Coming up tomorrow, the Ohio Federation of Teachers. Until then, all of you have a safe and wonderful day.
That concludes another episode of the America's Workforce Radio Podcast. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss a show. America's Workforce is a production of Labor Tools and BMA Media Group. Find out more information online at labortools.com.